Hello and welcome to the CSN3M Mindset Monday podcast. I'm Andrew Wade with Case Specific Nutrition. On this channel, we focus on the 3M's: mindsets, myth busting, and mentoring, all as they pertain to health and nutrition. This podcast is brought to you by the OptiLife Academy, Case Specific Nutrition's very own do-it-yourself wellness course. Be sure to check out the free trial at optilifeacademy.com or by clicking the link in the show notes. You can use code ANDREW at checkout for 10% off. On today's episode of CSN3M, we will be discussing an extremely common phrase that has some serious consequences to it. And the phrase is one that I think all of my fellow dietitian and professionals out there it's gonna resonate with them. And I think pretty much every person listening is going to realize that they either say it or they know somebody who says it. And the statement is, "I thought that was healthy," in somewhat of an exclamatory and questioned manner. I hear this on a regular basis, and it just speaks to the confusion that we have in our lives in terms of diet culture and in terms of the overall health and wellness community at large, where we continue to really struggle with dichotomous thinking. The word healthy is something that I've investigated over the years. I wrote a blog post about it about 5 years ago as a vexing vocabulary item is what I called it, because it was a confusing word. And I recorded a podcast a couple months ago as well, discussing the word health and healthy. And it's one that will continue to come up because until we really fully understand what the word healthy and what the concept of health is, we're going to continue to kind of fall into different traps and different areas of confusion. So in the phrase, "I thought that was healthy," the biggest issue with that phrase is that it's oversimplifying what health is. I think we have to remember that health is an overall assessment of our self, right? So it's a reflection of self as a whole. It's not meant to be defined for one individual item. So when we think about our personal health, we are thinking about our sleep and our stress and our overall diet, which again is what we eat, and how we move our body, our flexibility, our emotional status, our relationships. Our health is reflective of all things and really how well our life is in balance in most ways. You could argue that, because our diet as a whole is something that is pretty complex, we could assess if a diet is healthy. But even then, it's the diet as a whole, right? So the idea is, first, we'd want to look at the food itself, right? And it's not just one individual food, but I like to use the thought experiment of if you piled up all your food for the week into a pile on the floor and looked at it, what would you see, right? Would you see a variety of foods that have, good quality proteins and phytonutrients and antioxidants and vitamins and mineral and fiber and carbohydrates and a variety of fats? Because if so, that diet is healthy. And there are a lot of foods that people deem unhealthy that are absolutely a part of a healthy diet, because a healthy diet includes everything. And that's the other part of it, is once you're done looking at the pile of food as a whole, before you can really deem a diet healthy, which, remember, the word diet is a reflection on what you eat, right? And also to a certain extent what your relationship with food is. That's the next piece of it. Once we pile up the food and take a look at the balance and all the nutrients and all the wonderful things that your diet is providing you, we also want to be looking at the relationship with that food. Someone who has complete obliviousness to what they're eating. So they're just eating anything and everything without any understanding of, how it's helping them or not helping them, how it's, allowing them to feel satisfied or how it may be negatively affecting their hunger and fullness. We want to think about the intention behind the food, and don't confuse intention with obsession. The goal isn't to micromanage, but instead to have good intentions with the realization that your food is meant to do more than just taste good, right? It's meant to taste good, it's meant to feel good, and it's meant to provide your body with the essential nutrients. And then with that, I think the last piece is, in the relationship with food, is there guilt or is there satisfaction, right? So it becomes this idea of, what's the emotional status of eating a cookie? Is it something that you enjoy, or is it something that provides feelings of guilt? And all of those things play into whether your diet is healthy or unhealthy. There are a lot of people that claim they eat healthy in that they eat a lot of really good, natural, minimally processed foods, but they're obsessive about it and it subtracts and detracts from their mental status, or they feel guilty when they eat certain things, which occupies their mind and throws off their overall health and wellness picture because of the negative feelings and the stress. And so that all is to say that it's really, really easy to use the word healthy to oversimplify. But what we can see is that if we think about health as a whole, it is extremely complex. And then when we think about trying to identify the health of your diet, it is also equally complex. And so if we are then going to look at individual foods, it becomes impossible for us to say that a food is healthy or unhealthy by itself. We don't know enough about how much of it's being eaten, what it's being eaten with, and the mental status with which it's being eaten. And that's a really important thing here because there's a lot of confusion that stems from this. The reason I came up with this as a podcast topic is because I had a client that was talking to me about a friend of theirs who had rheumatoid arthritis and was trying to use their diet as an intervention. And for those of you that are not familiar, rheumatoid arthritis is an autoimmune condition where your body basically attacks itself. I won't dig into too much detail beyond that, but it leads to joint inflammation and it can be really debilitating. There's a lot of medications that are used to intervene, but there has been some relief and even some reports of reversals, though not at a clinical state. They are still more self-reports of diet being able to help that, which to a certain extent makes sense because our diet does impact our inflammation, and our inflammation can vary from food to food. So long story short, a client of mine was telling me about how they had a friend that went on what's called the AIP diet, which is the autoimmune protocol. And it's a pretty intense, rigid restriction diet that isn't really meant to be the way you live for good. It's really meant to be a short-term investigation that allows people to learn what foods, if any, are leading to the inflammation or maybe worsening their symptoms. And one of the things that is removed in the AIP diet are the nightshade family of vegetables. And the nightshades include tomatoes and eggplants and peppers, among other things. But those are three of the most common foods in the nightshade family that we kind of experience on a day-to-day basis. Or during this conversation, the client went, so they're not eating tomatoes and they're not eating peppers. And they said they're feeling a lot better, but I thought tomatoes were healthy. And that is such a key example of what happens, right? Here's a person that doesn't have rheumatoid arthritis, that is not doing an elimination diet to assess what their body is doing and how their body's responding, who now subconsciously and perhaps even consciously is confused and may think that tomatoes and peppers and eggplant are unhealthy, and as a result may avoid them for a reason that has nothing to do with them. And I could give you examples. I'll give you a few more, but I could give you examples for days. I hear people say, I thought nuts were healthy when they find out that they're high in fat. Or avocados. I thought avocados were healthy. When people are hearing about the ketogenic diet, which is a very low-carb diet, it brings up the conversation of on a ketogenic diet, you don't eat carbohydrates. Well, does that mean that oatmeal and blueberries, both of which are carbohydrates, are suddenly unhealthy? Or on the paleo diet, which is another, again, more rigid or restrictive elimination style diet where you don't eat legumes, are we now saying that chickpeas and hummus and black beans are unhealthy? And what we can see there is between diets that are in, fad diets, right? Diets that have a rigid, restricted bullet point list of do's and don'ts, they start to make blanketed statements of do eat this, don't eat this. But as a culture, we somehow have decided or allowed all of those random considerations and guidance to lead us to feel things are healthy or unhealthy. And so now we have people that are vegan because they are either, fighting for animal cruelty or they're, working on environmental concerns. And now we have people that think meat or animal protein of all kinds are unhealthy. And we have people that are going keto and they think blueberries and oatmeal are unhealthy. And we have paleo people that think legumes and corn is unhealthy. And by the time we go through every diet strategy and we see what we call the avoid list, we've literally found every single food on that list. So now everything is unhealthy. And the misnomer there is that none of those diets are saying that those foods are unhealthy, or said another way, none of those diets should be saying that those things are unhealthy. Those diets are attempting to create a bullet-pointed list that drives up consistency, and they're attempting to do different things, right? The removal of nightshades is attempting to assess if the body is having an basically your immune system's reaction to certain types of vegetables. That is not something that the majority of the population should be paying attention to. That's a very small minority, and like I said before, from an evidence-based perspective, it's still being heavily researched. It's not something that's fully understood, but we were definitely not looking at it and saying that millions should be eliminating peppers and tomatoes. A ketogenic diet is attempting to observe the body's response to insulin and insulin resistance. And while this is something that does affect people, this doesn't affect, the majority of people. And so I'm going to do a keto podcast at some time and dig into it individually. But those are two examples. And then, we can use vegan as the third one, where there's a lot of benefits to a plant-based diet, which I said in a previous podcast is not a vegan diet. Vegan is a type of plant-based eating. It is an exclusive plant-based eating where most plant-based diets seek to increase plants, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains and decrease the amount of protein. And that's based on the observation that as Americans, we tend to overconsume protein and under-consume vegetables. And so I'm all for a plant-based diet that increases vegetables, increases whole grains, and allows protein to be the side dish, because that is actually how we really should eat. And like I said, I dig into that in one of our first episodes, A Case for Omnivores, because we are omnivores, which means we benefit from both. But that's the key there, is that veganism is not to say that animal protein is bad for us. And any statement that animal protein in moderation, appropriately balanced in our diet is detrimental is absolutely false. So to recap, we have this phrase, I thought that was healthy. And the phrase, I thought that was healthy, is usually pinpointed at a specific food or food group that is in fact healthy for most people, in the same way that most foods, and by most foods I mean all foods, are healthy if balanced appropriately, and if they do the things that we talked about earlier. And so the phrase, I thought that was healthy, really does misguide and deceives and distracts and confuses a lot of us, because we can see where all things in some way can be considered unhealthy if we're not careful. And it's because food as individual items are not healthy or unhealthy. They're components of our diet, right? Our overall diet is what drives our body's processes and drives our inflammation and drives our energy levels and drives our cell repair. Food as a whole does that, not individually. And so if we're going to take one food and look at it, we can't say that it's healthy or unhealthy. But then more importantly, we have to ask ourselves, where is that information coming from? Where is this list of foods that are healthy, foods that are unhealthy? I did a podcast before where I identified that a lot of what we'd call the commonly accepted quote unquote unhealthy foods are actually not unhealthy. They're just lonely. In that things like pizza and ice cream and a lot of the fun foods that most people now think of as unhealthy. The reality is that it's because we don't eat them as a part of a complete diet. So they end up, basically not allowing our digestion to be appropriate. And we get mixed feelings of satisfaction, both physically and mentally, because they're not balanced out in the way that would be ideal. But in addition to that list, which we've already debunked in the Lonely Foods podcast, we can see that a lot of these fad diets, which are attempting to give people rigid focus, or in many cases, these elimination diets, which are attempting to help people navigate their own health, are not creating lists that are meant to say healthy or unhealthy. They're creating lists of eat this and avoid that to try and drive forward an observation. And I'm not going to criticize elimination diets. I'm not going to criticize some of the fad diets on this specific podcast. Instead, I would say that when you do these types of things, you want to make sure you're working with someone who has a comprehensive understanding of food in all aspects, food, how it pertains to our health physically and mentally and emotionally. Because if we're not careful, and you listen to sound bites of information from vegan, platforms, and sound bites of information from keto platforms, and sound bites of information from paleo platforms, you're going to end up feeling like there's no food that's actually healthy. And the reality is that none of those platforms are saying healthy, unhealthy. They're saying eat this, not that, for their own causes. My role as a dietitian and our role here at Case Specific Nutrition is to help you figure out how you eat. So not to figure out what foods are healthy and unhealthy, all foods are healthy, but to figure out what foods feel the best for you, what foods rotate well within your day and your routine, given your reality, given your chronic diseases, given your obstacles that you have, because we do know that one size does not fit all, right? One meal setup does not fit all. One diet really does not fit all. We want to be observing how individuals eat and how that food feels and nourishes them, and then how that plays a role in the rest of their total wellness picture. So the next time you hear someone saying, or you catch yourself saying, I thought that was healthy, try and correct that phrase and change it from I thought that was healthy to instead a question of, I wonder what they're doing on their health journey, right? So it's trying to remove that phrase and catch it and say, wait a second, this isn't a statement of good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. There's more to this story. Why is someone removing this? And why could that potentially be a choice for them that is good? And also, why is it a choice that may not make sense for you? If we go forward with a better understanding of the decisions we make, we're going to have a much better opportunity to find our true health, that true overall assessment of self, with reflection on how we're eating, how we're fueling, how we're feeling, and how we're living. I hope this has been a helpful podcast and an interesting perspective. I'll be excited to hear the messages that I get from those of you that are going to catch people saying, I thought that was healthy, and call them out and say, it is healthy. It just might not be, something that fits well for that person. Thanks again for listening. Please subscribe to our channel and share on your favorite social media, tagging a friend or loved one and hashtagging Spread the Health. For more case-specific nutrition content, follow us on all social media at Case Specific Nutrition and check our website at casespecificnutrition.com.